Hi, everyone. I'm Paige. I'm the director of the Spatial Analysis Lab, and I'm also a research assistant professor in the Rubenstein School. And today, I'll talk about kind of just leveraging GIS drones for flood response and public health. I did go on a bit of a tangent in my slides, so I kind of deviated from this title. But there's a lot of just really cool applications around using GIS for water, right? So water quality, thinking about mapping invasive aquatic species, harmful algal blooms, snowpack monitoring. So thinking about water in its different form. But then there's all these ways too that we could kind of talk about later on where even though maybe there's not this like direct link to public health, there's still an indirect link. If we think about kind of access to freshwater, recreation, just even like the aesthetics of looking at this beautiful lake versus a lake that has a bunch of water chestnut and the water quality's gone kind of down the drain. So also happy to have folks interrupt if they want, ask questions, what have you. Figured I would start with just a quick background about kind of where I come from. So I actually worked in the Spatial Analysis Lab over a decade ago when I was an undergrad. So it really felt like a homecoming when I came back and did my postdoc there and then kind of took over as the director. I, took my first intro to GIS course senior year, was like, what is this? This seems cool. And then I worked in the lab for 2 years while interning at the Vermont Department of Health and really saw this connection where I could take my passion of public health and kind of understanding the environment as someone who loves to be outside and actually kind of meet it at this intersection of geospatial analyses. So I left the lab on my way out. The director at the time jokingly said, you go off, get your PhD. If you want to come back for your postdoc, we'd love to have you. And I was like, probably not going to be in academia. I don't love it. Went off to Boston University School of Public Health, got my master's, got my PhD, really focused on understanding how we can capture the exposure of the environment to us and how that impacts our health. So I got to co-teach GIS classes, got to be a TA, got to really just build out my dissertation to whatever I wanted. And then COVID happened, moved back to Vermont because I didn't want to be in a city. And Jarlath, the previous director, reached out to me on Strava, saw that I was mountain biking. And he was like, you want that postdoc now? And I was like, I don't know, I don't know, maybe. So we talked, and the reason why I ended up coming back was because the work that we do at the lab that I'll talk about is very much applicable science. We're not necessarily, the folks that are pushing out the most publications, but we make the most reports. We are constantly talking with communities at the start of the project, throughout the project, at the end. So then that way they can actually utilize our data. And I really loved that impact. I also got to do some business development. So just kind of schmoozing with folks at conferences, and then also just project management. And so I came back as a postdoc and then took over as director in January of 24. And throughout kind of my GIS career, which spans over a decade, I've kind of landed on this general theme of that there's just this need to understand, the distribution of our landscape. What nature do we have? What are the resources? Just to create kind of a more resilient and healthy community. And we can think of community as people, we can think of community as community of wildlife, just in general, right? So thinking maybe broader as an ecosystem. Really briefly, just quickly thinking about how does the environment around us actually impact our health. We can have flooding, which can have direct impacts to, property damage, roads, infrastructure, water quality, right? So contamination of drinking water sources. We can also have, urban heat island. If we want to think about kind of, summers are getting hotter. And with that, our cities are going to also get hotter. So thinking about how, heat stress can impact our cardiovascular system. There's also air pollution. So I don't know if folks were outside at all this past summer, but we had a really crazy summer of a lot of wildfire smoke coming down from Canada. And so thinking about how does that smoke exposure impact kind of our day-to-day life, what we want to do, all of that. I mean, I think there was 6 weekends in a row that it was either raining or smoky. And one day we were like, we're just going to go outside, we're going to do something. But that's not necessarily crazy active. And so we went downhill mountain biking, which probably wasn't a bad idea. But 3 days, the last 3 days of that, I was like, my lungs hurt. So how does that actually like impact our health? And so power of GIS is that we can actually see that spatial relationship and really be able to visualize something that on a table or kind of a graph might not necessarily be as useful. So this is just the classic example. I'm a trained epidemiologist. So the example of Jon Snow in London realizing that a particular water pump in downtown London was the cause of the cholera outbreak is just the classic example. I'm sure that folks were doing this before he is credited by it, but you know, as an epidemiologist, we all know who he is. But it's really important though to think about if we are able to visualize the disease patterns, resources that we have, the landscape that we have, it's easier to then one, talk to just the general audience about it, impact policy when we have actual data to drive that policy. And it really gives folks kind of something that they can relate to. They can point out, oh, that's where I live, or that was my water pump. So again, it's such a powerful tool. There was also a bunch of other talks this semester that I think most brought up some type of maps. I don't think I actually have to persuade anyone here that maps are important, just in case. Two quick projects that we use GIS for that kind of relate to health. One of which is we're looking at tree canopy change over time and looking at the longitudinal impact of that change with this nurses health study cohort, longitudinal cohort. And we're really looking at kind of mental health and physical health. We also did this wildfire smoke exposure and pediatric asthma control work. And this was led by a PhD student in the GUND, Anna Massel, and my whole purpose of that was basically to show the distribution of PM2.5, which is pollutant, and it's within wildfire smoke, and how that was distributed across zip codes as we were kind of tracking kind of asthma control over 3 summers. Quick overview about the SAL. So we like to say we are where GIS started in Vermont. So we've been mapping for over 40 years here. We are Esri. We have the Esri license, so that's like the mapping kind of package. I think we are license number 83, and there are probably thousands, tens of thousands of licenses. So we like to kind of have that as a feather in our cap. But we do a lot of different work, and I think I already mentioned this, but the basis of our work is always around kind of community challenges that we have the technical expertise and support. So then that way we can give them the data to make some sort of change, to enact policy. And that I think is it's really key in the work that we do. We do land cover assessments, which are kind of go into our urban tree canopy assessments. And we've mapped, over 100 communities across the country. We're now kind of starting to go global with this, which is really exciting. And this provides just communities with, inventory data about their green, gray, and blue infrastructure, right? So then they know kind of how many trees they have, what are the patterns of change, and then where can they go from there? And like I mentioned, it's really baked in how our data can be used to impact policy. So it's just 4 examples. Most notable, I think, is the Million Trees New York study. So that initiative was back in like 2007, 2008. They had this goal of we're going to plant 1 million trees across New York City. We mapped the 3rd iteration of tree canopy change for New York City back in the spring, and they're using that information to see how successful that initiative was. So it's actually being used for something. Boston, we just finished our 3rd iteration, but in 2019, Mayor Wu announced using our data that they're going to invest more in trees. So again, it's like, how can we actually be on the ground with these communities and give them information that they're actually going to use? Because I don't want our data to sit on a shelf. That is like the worst possible thing. We also have an amazing UAS team. So I brought a drone if we want to talk more about that. And our UAS team started back in 2012. So 2012, we had Tropical Storm Irene hit. It was devastating. We had floods like we have not seen for quite a while. That was the start of my freshman year as an undergrad, and I remember my classes were canceled the first day because of Tropical Storm Irene. So I was like in the midst of it. And the biggest thing here was there was a ton of damage. There was a lot of flooding. We didn't know the flooding extent. And the only thing that we had access to was satellite data at the time. It was cloudy. we could not actually see kind of what the extent of the damage was, who needed help, where did they need help, or anything along those lines. And so what my previous director did was he said, we need drones because we need to be below the clouds. We need to be able to fly, you know, even if it's just drizzling out. We can't fly in downpours, but we can fly when it's just drizzling out to actually capture any of this information. And so we started with one drone, which it wasn't this one, but it's similar. So it's an EB, it's a fixed wing drone. And then now we have over 25 active drones in our lab. So we have multi-rotors, we have a few of these, which are really great because these can actually fly over people because it's foam. So if it falls on you, you might just get a bruise. And then we have also like a massive, I think it's the the M300s are small, but we have a huge one. And then we also have a vertical takeoff and landing one, which is really fun. So it like, you know, lands vertical and then it goes horizontal. But we have a lot of different drones now. But thinking about like, okay, I just talked a lot. Yes.
How do the drones collect data?
Yeah, so we put sensors in here. So like I took the sensor out because I didn't want to walk across campus with it. But basically the sensor goes in here. So we had a SOTA camera on here, which is just, you know, like a either true color or multispectral camera. And then it flies. And then the camera, kind of the lens is here and it takes photos as it flies. So it'll fly like along an automated flight path. Okay. And it'll take a bunch of photos, and I'll show you a bunch of data that we've collected. But these are funny because every time it takes a photo, it stops spinning. So it like kind of dips. And so we had kind of an off comment when we first bought them. They looked like a drunken raven because they would just like dip and then like go. It was, yeah. We can't say that anymore, but they're really fun in the sense that like we flew so many of those over the flooding that happened, right? So over the past 3 years, just because those are safe to fly over and it's like this automated flight path. So you kind of just like throw it up, it goes, and then it takes either imagery or LiDAR, so elevation data.
Yeah.
But yeah, there's a lot of really fun things. And those drones don't cost too much money. It's the sensors that cost a lot. So we just submitted a proposal for a bathymetric LiDAR sensor. So to like actually look at like the lake shore underwater, which would be really fun. I think that was like for 300,000. So we have insurance on all of our stuff because it's expensive. But thinking about everything that I just talked about, and I apologize if I talk too fast, I just get excited because my team is great. How does this all connect back to like human health, right? So how does what we do kind of play around water, human health, and then using GIS to actually look at patterns or anything like that? All right, I'm gonna give a bunch of examples. Feel free to stop me. We can talk about any of these. Flooding is the big one, right? So flooding, we had catastrophic over 100-year flooding events for the past 3 years, all on July 10th, which is now my least favorite day. And I'm going to show examples just from 2023 and 2024, but flooding is a big one. And understanding the connection between human health or public health and flooding, there's a lot, right? And a lot of them seem kind of common sense, right? You think about just like wading in contaminated water, right? I remember seeing photos of people paddleboarding in downtown Waterbury or like tubing. And I was like, do you know what's in that water that like you are potentially now in contact with? There's contaminated drinking water, right? So you think about the wells, all of that. Also waterways. So I remember in 2023, it was hot, it was wet, and then it was also smoky. And no one could actually go swimming in the rivers because they weren't safe because of all the runoff from agriculture, livestock, all of that. And then even in the lake, there was kind of like a probably don't want to swim. So there's a lot of ways that flooding can impact human health. These are some images that we collected back in 2023, right? So it can impact us by blocking roadways. What if you have a doctor's appointment and you no longer can leave your home because you can't drive anywhere, right? Thinking about maybe search and rescue, there's the car down there. There's a lot of ways that we can collect this data though, so then it's actually useful. Like I mentioned, there's some immediate and long-term impacts, right, of flooding and health. So drowning, there's injuries, there's infectious disease, like I mentioned. So like wading, swimming, drinking contaminated water. The mold and air quality too is one that we tend to forget about. So house floods, you try to dry it out. You live in New England, so it's kind of humid. It doesn't dry properly, and then you kind of have this mold. There's also long-term impacts, right? So mental health, another big rainstorm comes, you have this fear again of like, am I also going to be flooded? Chronic diseases, and then also just thinking about the vulnerable populations that might need access to resources and they might not be able to get there. You also have, damage to infrastructure. This is like complete bank erosion and like total road issue here. And then you also have, again, kind of flooding with agriculture. So what we did in 2023 and 2024 was we had a UAS response, so the drone response, and then we also had a mapping response. So the drone response was we were able to collect oblique images and videos, that's kind of at an angle. And then we were also able to collect mapping, so that's kind of aerial imagery, really easy to then kind of look at, all right, what's here, what's the damage, and then you can easily classify that image using GIS. And then also LiDAR, so that is elevation data, which can give us information about stream corridors, bank erosion, landslide risk, which was huge as well. So we collected all of this different types of data. In 2023, it was over a terabyte of data, and same with 2024. And the two rain events of these years were very different, right? So 2023, north to south, 3 to 9 inches over like 24, 48 hours. In 2024, it was like, west to east. So it was just kind of the upper portion of Vermont. And what we did with all of this data is we ended up sharing it with FEMA with this web mapping application that was put up with the Vermont Center for Geographic Information. And then FEMA was actually able to ingest all of this information into, their black box of how they do disaster declarations, how they also look at disaster relief funds. So then that way, when folks were, submitting grants for, I need to rebuild my property, there was a lot of damage, they were able to do it without ground assessors on the ground. So we looked at the data and it came out that with the response that the team did, we were able to get a disaster declaration and folks were able to apply for funding 6 weeks before they would have been able to if they needed ground assessors. So again, like real world impacts that the team can have if we're posed to actually respond to an event. With this application, there's a lot of different imagery. You can kind of zoom into some of the images to really see, where there's road cutoffs, where there's like, building damages and all of that. This is another one. It's just really, it's easy to see kind of where that destruction is. You also see other things around. There might need to be another emergency response there for like a fire, right? So thinking about, it's not just the immediate flood, but it's then the aftermath of what happens with all of this. You can look at damages around 3D buildings. And then this is kind of looking at different elevation and what might be at risk for landslides. And then this is kind of similar. So then I mentioned we also had this mapping response. So I worked with the Vermont Department of Health and some recent graduates in our lab just looking at flooding and drinking water contamination. So within 2 days of the flooding event, we were able to get satellite imagery pre and post flooding. And we created just kind of an approximate flooding extent map using satellite imagery. So we used normalized difference vegetation index and normalized difference water index. And what we looked at was if we mapped that flooding extent accurately, how many private wells would have been impacted and how many private or residents might need water testing kits and drinking water, like bottled water. So we were able to then provide this information back to the Vermont Department of Health like within the week of all of this happening, which again was really key when they're kind of, totally underwater with just trying to figure out and run testing kits. We were able to provide some resource there. And so we're finally getting to publishing a paper on this, but it takes a while. We also can look at bank stability and stream corridors. So again, thinking about what does this have to do with human health? This can be, damage to property and livelihoods, right? So that has an impact. It can also impact stream just quality in general. If we think about how folks use rivers, streams, and all of that across Vermont. And then also stream corridors, if they're fully shifting with just so much water moving through them in a flooding event, does that change the flooding risk of people that live around that area? Because now the stream moves a certain way. And so we're able to use LiDAR. So this is actually real LiDAR that we collected. And this is the stream corridor here. And we looked at a comparison between 2017 and 2023 flooding of a particular bank. And what we saw was in 2017, it was nice and gradual, not a ton of erosion. 2023 flooding hit, and you have about, I would say, 5 to 7 meters of bank erosion in a particular area, and it goes from gradual to steep. So what does that potentially do for the folks potentially like living up here, or maybe they have land that they're, harvesting, maybe there's livestock up there. How does that then change the water movement in this particular stream? So really powerful things that we can kind of learn using our fun drones. We can also look at ecosystem services, which has a cleaner tie with human health. So this can be anything from like heat mitigation, water quality, just stormwater runoff is another one, carbon sequestration, all of that. And that's using our land cover data. So I said that we map land cover. This is kind of what it looks like. And we can map anything from the city of Burlington, which we've done 3 times, to the entire Chesapeake Bay watershed, which was massive. So it was almost 100,000 square miles. And what the Chesapeake Bay watershed and the Conservancy did with all of this data was they wanted to look at how just water moves in this entire watershed and how it could potentially impact the Chesapeake Bay area, which is definitely something that, they want to protect because there's a lot going on down there. So they were interested just in how things are changing across this entire landscape and what are the downstream impacts along the watershed. I went all the way up to upstate New York to Virginia. So definitely a big area. Like I mentioned, we can do runoff retention. So think stormwater moving fast through an urban area. You can look at the percent impervious, and then, which is like other paved buildings, roads, all of that. And then look at if we were to have kind of a high precipitation event, what would happen? Where would that water move? And are there kind of sinks where there's a lot of soil or tree canopy that can kind of help with that stormwater kind of runoff? So we can run invest tools, which are created by the Stanford Natural Capital Project, on all of our land cover data. Yes.
For that last one, is the lower the number, the less retention that it has.
Yes. Yeah. So it's like, this is the county that Cincinnati, Ohio is in. So this is kind of where the city of Cincinnati is, which has a very low retention index, which makes sense because it's pretty urban, built up. And then the surrounding areas have a higher retention. So this is really based off of tree canopy versus impervious in roads and buildings.
Is that already existing data like that?
We created that data. And then the existing model is the invest model that we plugged our data into.
Wow.
So yeah, I can talk about the data that we produce all day because there's a lot. But we also do aquatic monitoring. And again, thinking, what's that connection with human health? Because as I was putting this together, I was like, I'm going further and further from that like overall theme. But again, thinking about how do we use our waterways in Vermont, right? We use them to recreate. We use them for food if we're going fishing. We also use them to cool off in the summers because a lot of infrastructure and buildings here weren't built with AC because we are in New England. I didn't have AC when I was growing up here. So like now realizing that the summers are getting hotter and folks are going to be utilizing our waterways a lot more, we're going to have to be monitoring those systems. So then, you think about harmful algal blooms, invasive aquatic species, all of those things can have, negative impacts on human health. So this is just an example of some drone imagery that we've collected looking at invasive aquatic species. We're really, concerned about all of this right here. I don't know which species this is, but this is true color imagery. So if you were on the drone, this is what you would see. But this is multispectral, which these kind of species here really pop. And that's what's so powerful about all the sensors that we have, because we're not necessarily, we can see that there's a difference. But let's say you wanted to create training data to plug into an AI model that would then be like anything that looks like this, claim it as an invasive aquatic species that we need to monitor. Well, this could look similar to this up here or these. And so there'd be some errors. We're looking at the kind of hot pink or the deep red. This is a lot more different than these areas over here. So again, it's just the power of the sensors that we have that allow us to do this research. So with this, we can then kind of look at how much water chestnut is in a particular water body, right? We can zoom in, we can really look at different points. And this is part of a research project that we're on with the Mississippi State University and the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers, where we're looking at just security and the health of the waterways, of the Lake Champlain Basin area, and then particular water sheds in Mississippi. So it's really cool. So this is training data that's actually going to go into an AI model. And we are looking, I think, at 5 different invasive aquatic species in Vermont. So we've collected, I think we've done over like 400 flights over the past few years, which is really exciting. And we have folks that are basically classifying, what's water chestnut, what's just water. And then we're going to be able to kind of create this AI model. Harmful algal blooms, that has a direct impact on human health, I would say, because you don't want to be swimming in them. You don't want your pets to be swimming in them. And then I know that there was also some research being done around just the air quality around harmful algal blooms and the connection with brain health. So there's like that whole study too around, if you live in an area with more harmful algal blooms. But that being said, there's a kind of a more direct connection here. With that, we're able to use drones again to actually take water samples. So I think we're actually partnering with folks from SEMS. They created a sensor that dips into the water and gets a sample of the water for the harmful algal bloom. So this is just an example. We actually are still doing work. So the May through August 2022, we're actually continuing to do work every summer on this project. The only issue that we've run into a few issues, one of which was one of our drones went for a swim and it is now lost with Champ. But the other issue is that when we take kind of aerial imagery of water, so not these oblique ones from an angle, but the direct ones, there's no ground truth reference point. So then stitching those images together, like I mentioned, that takes an image and then we stitch it together. Stitching those images together are really challenging. Yes.
So why do you use the oblique pictures then if the bird's eye view are going to get like that more accurate mapping?
This just gives us a really good idea about what we're looking at, right? So if we just took like one image and just looked at like here, it would be difficult to kind of understand where in the context of the landscape you are. So it gives just a lot of like contextual clues. Yeah, that's a good question though. And most of the photos and the imagery that we took of the flooding is actually oblique because they just wanted video of like get as much information as you can about where the flooding is. Okay, so this is the sensor. Nice little beach. Looks like it's a nice day out. Maybe not if there's harmful algal blooms. And then it dips into the water and collects that sample. All right, I think this might be the last one, and then we can just talk. Snowpack monitoring. So looking at water in a different form. It's also really exciting because last year, through the project that we were working on, half the team that does this work actually got EPIC passes to do this research, which is awesome.
I got to go up with them. It was
fun. And I was like, I'm the director, like, can I go? And they're like, you don't go out on research anymore. And I was like, okay, fine, you guys have fun. But it was really great though. Basically, this is all about looking at snowpack on Mount Mansfield. We do a leaf off flight as well. So in October, it's not as fun because you can't ski up and then ski down, but it's probably beautiful views up there. And then every time there's like kind of a big snow event, or almost once a week, we would go out there, or the team would go out there. They hop on the quad, they go up, and then they ski tour to the top of the nose, which is where we store the drones. Take all the imagery, I'll show you, and then they get to ski down. And if it's not closing yet, they can just go ski because they already did their work. But it's really cool. Yeah, so this is kind of the area that we fly from. And then these are all the different sites that we are interested in. So we're kind of, looking at how snow depth differs at different elevations, what's kind of the melting pattern as well, kind of going from there. So they got to go on a lot of really fun things. So again, yeah, this is a kind of 2-mile corridor that one of our drones flew. You can see the LiDAR DSM, which is the digital surface model. So that's kind of the trees, looking at the forest itself. And then you have the DEM, which is the digital elevation model, which kind of gets at the ground level bare earth. And so using the DEMs, we're able to look at how snow depth kind of differs over time. Oh, there's one more, sorry. All right, I think this one is video, so it will be fun. Fish habitat, stream upwells. So again, thinking, how does this connect with humans, recreation? If folks are trying to fish and then eat the fish, can be some food and all of that. And then thinking about, there's been a lot of studies around how humans benefit from biodiversity and from just being in nature. And so if we are worried about, fish no longer being able to live in streams in Vermont because they're too hot, then we're losing biodiversity. And that does have an impact on human health. It's just a little bit more of an indirect one than kind of flooding with drinking water contamination. So this is an exciting project that is funded by the Lake Champlain Basin Program. And we are working with an engineering firm on this. And we're really interested in just fish habitat. So how has that changed with warming of the streams, because the streams are getting hotter? So there's some cold water upwells that are happening in these streams that we're looking at that fish are tending to congregate around. So we want to actually look at where those upwells are. Are there fish there? And then the other thing is we want to count salmon spawning areas. So that's also really exciting that we can use drones for. So this is what we're able, I wonder if this is going to play. Let's see. Maybe it will. This is a video, if it does play. If not, I can just share my slides with everyone if they're interested. It's not gonna play, that's sad. But it just showed kind of a video of the drone looking around this stream to try to find different salmon. So we were trying to count salmons here. This is a better photo of kind of a different stream. And here again, we're looking for this one. We're just looking at true color, so we're looking for fish. But then if we want to look at some thermal or multispectral, we can kind of see different things here. And then there's also, I believe this is multispectral and this is thermal. So we're not seeing any kind of ground upwells or colder temperatures in this area. And this was also a fun video, but I'm guessing it's not going to play. Oh, there we go. Yeah. So we have a pilot flying the drone, just kind of looking at, can we see any fish? What does the stream flow look like? But it's very exciting, yeah.
When you say what does the stream flow look like, do you also through this sort of way of taking data try to take into account the actual flow of the river? Is that part of the
I want to not like the turbidity or anything like that, but more or less just are we seeing changes in the way the water just even goes along the corridor? So if the water was higher, it would probably go along here. Or if it's really low, just taking that into account to say, well, maybe the fish aren't in this particular area anymore because they can't actually be here because there's not a whole lot of water. But that's a good question. All right, I think, is that another one?
I think it's the same.
Okay, all right. Now we can just have a conversation. But I get to work with some really, really knowledgeable folks. We have a team of 19 core staff and faculty. We also have 50 undergrad and recent grads working in our lab. So it's a big effort to work on all of these projects, but it allows us to span anything geospatial, which is really exciting. Yeah, open to questions. Yes.
You talked earlier about how you like collected the like 1.5 like was it like trillion gigabytes or like
Oh yeah, so we have a petabyte of data.
yeah. Are you ever concerned with like overwhelming people with that much data? Like where you're kind of like data dumping on them?
Yeah, so we have, well, I'm more worried about like data storage within UVM because it's just so much storage to deal with. So we have like a, you know, huge shelf unit with a bunch of external hard drives. We don't actually publish that amount of data. We just have it, right? So like that includes, you know, statewide LiDAR collects. So we're right now processing Vermont's statewide LiDAR, which is, I think, 50 terabytes. We have Texas, which we're working on, which was 150 terabytes. I don't understand what that looks like. I just can't fathom.
But I'm going off of that. Like, what do you guys, what's your process of like synthesizing the data to like make it digestible for other people that are not involved in it?
So a lot of that is data inputs. And so we actually don't then publish that data out because it's already either publicly available or the states already have it. We're able to kind of chunk it into smaller units. So either like we'll tile it. So we'll make it, instead of the entire state of Texas, we'll create like smaller tiles that are only, you know, a kilometer by a kilometer. So then it's easier for folks to look at. When we actually publish the data and like bring it back to the communities that we work with, that is in like a nice, neat map package. Maybe it's, you know, 15 gigabytes, depending on how much data they want, but it's a nice little map package. Sometimes we do a web map as well. And then we give them everything that they have requested. So it's like summary statistics. We bound it by different administrative boundaries that they think is going to be helpful. So like voting districts. And then we pass that along. So it's not, we never give them back something that's so unmanageable. And we also talk with them about what they're going to use it for and how they're going to use it. So if they don't have Arc Pro, we're not going to give them a map package with Arc. We'll use shape files and give them something that they could use on QGIS or Google Earth Engine. But that's a good question, though. I think it's really easy to just give them everything, but that is such an overload that if they don't know what to do with it or don't have like the expertise to work with it, then it's just going to sit on a shelf. And that's just like just such a waste. So it's either we can help them understand that data and then they can use it, or until they ask for it, it's like, maybe you don't need the DEMs for the entire state of Vermont. Maybe you do. Yeah.
At one point you were talking about, or throughout the whole thing, you said how you use like GIS to sort of support public health and get info on how those can be like connected. And then at one point you mentioned the environmental health, the biodiversity with like the fish, like not being able to live in warmer temperatures.
Yeah.
So how much, not only do you like, because I realize the main goal is public health, but how much do you also take into account those environmental factors and like use the data for that too? Does that make sense?
Yeah. So as like a trained epidemiologist, like most of the time I'm always looking at like the public health or environmental health lens. But there's also the tie back to nature and thinking about the ecosystem as a whole, like planetary health, right? Not just thinking about us, but thinking about how we interact with the environment and all of that. I would say it's actually more around the environmental side is what the lab does. I mean, I have like a side research that I'm able to do, right, as like a research assistant professor, but for the most part, we're looking at how many trees does a community have? Are they coniferous versus like deciduous, to look at, you know, what is that? Do they have pests that they want us to help kind of look at what that detriment was with like the emerald ash borer? We're starting this project with the World Wildlife Fund in Vietnam soon, looking at wildlife corridors and connectivity. So being like, this is a protected area. How has the landscape changed with an addition of a road? And then how can we kind of talk with the government and then also the landowners around, maybe don't have a monoculture landscape, maybe allow it to have a little bit of biodiversity so then animals can move through it. But I would say that I'm not an expert in all of the environmental things. So
cool. I was just asking because it seemed like super applicable both ways. That's really cool.
It really is. Like we can kind of do anything, which is exciting and also overwhelming. Yeah.
How much would you say like you use existing data like you can get on Google Earth Engine versus like data you create and collect yourself?
Yeah, so for the most part, a lot of the input data sets that we use, especially for like the urban tree canopy assessments, the land cover, that is all publicly available data that then we process and then create our own data from. So the kind of overarching methodology of that is we download the data, we process it in the correct coordinate system, and then it goes through machine learning algorithms that we've created over the past 20 years. So we developed this methodology with the US Forest Service and goes through that. It comes out about 80% accurate at a 1 meter resolution, which is good, but communities want better. They want to know where exactly to plant a tree. They need to know, with 95% accuracy. So then that's where a team of like 50 undergrads and recent grads come in and they actually do manual corrections. So they're zoomed in pretty close to say, yeah, that's a tree, or nope, that's a building, it's changed over time. And then it goes back to processing with machine learning. And then it goes to kind of our analysis, which is, we look at metrics for like how much tree canopy is in the census tract or anything like that. And then we create a report and publish it. Yeah.
Is your snowpack monitoring data collection connected with the new snowwater equivalent sensors that they installed up on Mansfield?
I believe so, yeah. So it's part of the Corel project.
Cool.
Mm-hmm.
Do you ever recommend, as back to the data usage, when you've like gone through the data and you're delivering like the package, do you ever recommend what they use that data for? Like if they ask you to do one thing and then you find out while reviewing all the data that it can probably lead to another thing.
Yeah.
Would you ever like recommend that or like mention that?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, a lot of the times when we're working with communities, it's very collaborative. Like we don't want to tell them what to use the data for. They come to us with a question or we're answering kind of a bid on the fact they want to create this data. And then as we're finding things in the data, as we're making it, that's when our expertise comes in and we're like, hey, did you think about this? Like we're seeing this pattern. Have you noticed this on the ground? Because we're also only looking at it from a top-down perspective. We're not looking at the ground. We don't go to the entire Chesapeake watershed to do, validation. So we don't know what they're actually experiencing on the ground. So I think that collaboration is really key. And then they come to us and they ask, can we use your data to solve this? And we're like, maybe, we don't know, like, let's try this out. So there's a lot of back and forth.
Oh.
Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Sort of asked it before. Just like wanted to get like a better idea of it. Was the oblique versus the bird's eye?
Yeah.
So the bird's eye are the ones that you like actually map together for actual like GIS mapping and DEMs and DSMs and stuff.
Yeah, it's like top down. So like what you would look like if you were looking straight down onto the ground.
Okay. And then the oblique is to more get an idea of how you would like fit those together almost. Is that right?
Yeah, it just gives you, like, again, like you had mentioned, just like better perspective, because if we just looked at like a top down of this, it would just be water or this over here. The oblique just gives us a really good perspective of like where we are in relation. We don't necessarily use them to stitch the data all together unless like, there's an issue with like our georeferencing or anything like that, which does occur over water.
All right, thank you.
Anything else? Anything anyone else wants to talk about? But
And my recording.
sounds good.
There you go.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah, of
So
course.
cool.
There's a lot. I mean, we just do a lot of cool stuff. I could talk about it for hours, which is the problem. It's like a 30-minute presentation. I'm like 55 minutes. But yeah, it's really exciting. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to email me. If I don't know the answer, someone on my team who's a lot smarter than me will, I'll ping them for it. But yeah, I feel fortunate. I get to, every day is a new adventure. So awesome.
And you don't do much like field research anymore, you said, correct?
Yeah, I mean, I kind of like definitely like jumped over like the core research years that I probably like will miss at some point.
Yeah.
Just because like as director, that's a lot of my job now is finding new projects for the lab. And granted, like my name's on it, but it's not necessarily like my my ideal project as like a public health person. But it's great though, because then I get to work on like snowpack monitoring, and I did get to go up with them last year, which was really fun. So like gotta go ski touring for a day. I was like, you can't reach me, emails on, like do not disturb. So I get to do a lot of really great projects, and I mean, the staff that I work with are just great experts. I mean, I'm not even a drone pilot, so I can't even fly that thing, but my staff can. And they're the ones that are going out and doing this great work. I just get to talk about it. Very cool. Maybe one day I'll go back to the field. It'd be nice. Awesome. All right, no other questions? I'm around. I'm also an Aiken, so let's go trudge back.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.